Welcome to the Archive of Nations, whom are the custodians of the sacred records from time immemorial. Please subscribe and press the notification button, as we have many lessons to educate and empower with a correct narrative of the past to create a lawful blueprint for the future. Welcome to webisode 9 of the Fallacy of Greece and Rome series, entitled The Uprising of the African Hericladie. We would advise that if you are new to our content, you subscribe to our channel and watch our previous webisodes in sequence, as we are providing a linear narrative in regards to the carbon organic realities of the Afarinka tribes of Egyptians, Ethiopians, Cushites, Phoenicians and Persians, whom were responsible for founding what is falsely referred to as Western civilization, and when and how the hybrid albino Asian invaders came to become the usurpers of the lands, cultures, and peoples. Many of Caucasian persuasion whom have committed the greatest form of identity theft across the globe have the audacity to claim that our researchable evidence is theft of their cultures, and we should just stay in sub-Saharan Africa. But our role as the Archive of Nations is to disseminate the wealth of information from a multitude of sources and present it as we find it, therefore setting the record straight, which has been hidden from carbon organic peoples worldwide and wider humanity as a whole. The Odyssey has one reference to the Dorians, and it reads, "There is a land called Crete, in the midst of the wine-dark sea, a fair, rich land, begirt with water, and therein are many men, past counting, and 90 cities. They have not all the same speech, but their tongues are mixed. There dwell Achaeans, their great-hearted native Cretans, their Sidonians, and Dorians of waving plumes, and goodly Pelasgians." In Greek historiography, many authors mention the Dorians. The chief classical authors to relate their origins are Herodotus, Thucydides, and Pausanias. It is mentioned that the Dorians were on Crete in Mycenaean times. Also, the Messenian town of Dorium is mentioned in the catalogue of ships, and the earliest inhabitants of Messenia were the carbon organic Pelasgians, as discussed in webisode 1, whom were eventually reduced to serfdom to the incoming tribes. If one researches the Dorians, you will be introduced to the Dorian invasion, which is a concept devised by historians of ancient Greece to explain the cultural discontinuities expressed in the data within the fields of the historians, archaeologists, and philologists, which is the study of language in oral and written historical sources, with strong ties to etymology. The cultural discontinuity is simply the difference in cultures between the carbon organic ancient indigenous Pelasgians, Minoans, and Mycenaeans, and the hybrid Asian albino newcomers, also known as those tribes with Yamnayya Steppe ancestry, who invaded the region, producing the Hellenes and Hellenistic hedonistic cultures. Herodotus was from Halicarnassus, a Dorian colony on the southwest coast of Asia Minor, following the literary tradition of the times. He wrote in Ionic Greek, being one of the last authors to do so. Herodotus gives a general account of the events termed the Dorian invasion, presenting them as transfers of population. Herodotus 1.57.1-3 reads, "What language, however, the Pelasgians used to speak I am not able with certainty to say. But if one must pronounce, judging by those that still remain of the Pelasgians who dwelt in the city of Creston above the Tersenians, and who were once neighbors of the race now called Dorian, dwelling then in the land which is now called Thessaliotis, and also by those that remain of the Pelasgians who settled at Placia and Skylake in the region of the Hellespont, who before that had been settlers with the Athenians, and of the natives of the various other towns which are really Pelasgian. Though they have lost the name, if one must pronounce judging by these, the Pelasgians used to speak a barbarian language. If therefore all the Pelasgian race was such as these, then the Attic race, being Pelasgian, at the same time when it changed and became Hellenic, unlearnt also its language. For the people of Creston do not speak the same language with any of those who dwell about them, nor yet do the people of Phakia, but they speak the same language one as the other, and by this it is proved that they still keep unchanged the form of language which they brought with them when they migrated to these places." Continuing with Herodotus 1.58, it reads as follows, "As for the Hellenic race, it has used ever the same language, as I clearly perceive, since it first took its rise, but since the time when it parted off feeble at first from the Pelasgian race, setting forth from a small beginning, it has increased to that great number of races which we see, and chiefly because many barbarian races have been added to it besides. Moreover, it is true, as I think, of the Pelasgian race also, that so far as it remained barbarian, it never made any great increase. The words of Herodotus make it clear that the Pelasgians and the Dorians coexisted before the incoming Hellenes, as mentioned in Homer's Odyssey, and also the Pelasgians had ventured as far north as the Hellespont, further confirming, as discussed in our previous webisodes, that carbon organic tribes of both Egyptian and Asiatic Phoenician origins founded both Troy and Sparta. He also makes it clear that the Pelasgians changed and became Hellenic by way of the Yamnayya Steppe herder invasion from the north, as we have discussed in previous webisodes, and will continue to show and prove as we progress. The return of the Hericladie, as it is also known as, is the narrative of the descendants of the carbon organic Hercules, who were exiled at his death and returned in later generations to reclaim the dominion that Heracles had held in the Peloponnesus. In the previous webisode, we have made it clear that Hercules is of carbon organic Phoenician origin. The Greece to which the tradition refers is the mythic one, but now identified in reality to be Mycenaean Greece, which, as previously discussed in webisode 4, became a fusion between the carbon organic tribes, families, and clans and the mixed tribes due to miscegenation of varying degrees of Yamnayya Steppe ancestry. The details differ from one ancient author to another, the commonality being that the traditional carbon organic ruling clan could trace its legitimacy to Heracles. This is something with further exploration that all rulers require in order to have lawful ruling legitimacy based on consanguinity, summed up under the heading the divine right of kings, which is more imperative today than you could possibly realize. As mentioned in previous episodes, Pelops means dark eyes or dark face, derived from Peleos dark and ops face, eye. Pelops is also considered an Egyptian prince in Greek mythology and one of the sons of Aegyptus. Thus far we have shown the ancient Afar Inca presence and foundations throughout Greek mythology. From the ancient African tribes grouped together who become known as the Pelasgians, to Danaus who sailed from Egypt, we have introduced both Cadmus and Europa from the carbon organic Phoenician royal families to Memnon king of Ethiopia at Troy, and also the African princess Libya, and more covered thus far. The evidence is overwhelming, and we will return in greater detail on all these personalities in due time. Toward the end of the 19th century, the philologist Paul Kretschmer made a strong case that Pelasgian was a pre-Greek substrate, perhaps Anatolian, taking up a classical theme of remnant populations existing in pockets among the Greek speakers, in mountainous and rural Arcadia and in inaccessible coasts of the far south. These remnants are the unmixed Pelasgians whom had made their way south or had always been there before the hybrid Asian albino Yamnayya Steppe invasion, also referred to as Proto-Greeks. John Chadwick, summarizing in 1976, wrote, "Let us therefore explore the alternative view. This hypothesis is that the Greek language did not exist before 2000 BC, but was formed in Greece by the mixture of an indigenous population with invaders who spoke another language." J.P. Mallory wrote in 1989, "The current state of our knowledge of the Greek dialects can accommodate Indo-Europeans entering Greece at any time between 2200 to 1600 BC to emerge later as Greek speakers. Many experts have identified and confirmed the years between 2200 to 2000 BC as the time the Hellenes came down from the north. For example, John V. A. Fine of Princeton University told us, the arrival of Proto-Greeks in Greece in the years around 2000 BC, then, would be in conformity with what little is known about the wanderings of other Indo-European speaking people, and particularly with the appearance of the Hittites and Luwians in Asia Minor. For several centuries, these Proto-Greeks spread over much of Greece, destroying various settlements and gradually blending in with the natives. Please note that it is recorded that these Proto-Greeks, being the nomadic Yamnayya Steppe herders, are destroying settlements and blending in with natives, also known as tying into the vine, or a form of cultural diffusion. During the 2200 to 2000 BC time period, due to a substantial portion of the carbon organic multitude of mixed stock, being both of Yamnayya Steppe ancestry and Neolithic Indo-European speaking people sweeping south into what is now central and southern Greece. The oral history of those times has given us the name of a leader and his sons who is a descendant of the carbon organic Pelasgians and Minoans, referred to by the ancient Egyptians as the Keftiu before the island became known as Crete. The term Crete is the root of the word creation, which in reality is where these eventual Hellenes upon their arrival began creating their false mythological history of creation, based on the previous ancient carbon organic culture's realities. As they had no cultured history, they could call their own only the history of the caves. The leader was named Hellen, and was the father of 3 sons, Dorus, Xuthus, and Aeolus, which resulted in the people being referred to as Hellenes and their country being called Hellas. We will discuss the Hellenes and their origins in later webisodes, as it is very revealing in understanding current Western ideologies. Before setting out on his campaign, Hellen was said to have left his eldest son Dorus in charge of the Hellenes who stayed in the north. As a result, those people came to be called Dorians. What eldest son means within this myth is that the Dorians were the oldest among the tribes, with a direct unmixed lineage going back to the Carbon Organic Phoenician Hercules, and therefore they were the ruling class. As Hellen, being ruler of the racially mixed multitude, marched southward, they encountered large towns still populated by carbon organic unmixed people they knew as Pelasgians. They passed the town of Pt9 just beyond the southern edge of their lands, then established their forward base of operations in the sparsely populated valley of the Spercheios River. This land came to be known as Thyia. Homer, in the part of the Iliad known as the Catalogue of Ships, mentions the Hellenes as a small tribe in Thessalic Thyia. According to Thucydides, Achaea Thyotis, as the birthplace of Hellen, was the home of the Hellenes. He says that before Hellen the name Hellas didn't exist, but rather there were the various indigenous carbon organic tribes which went under different names, particularly Pelasgian. It was only when Hellen and his sons grew strong in Thyotis that they allied with various cities in war, and these cities, one by one, through their association with Hellen and his sons, came to be called Hellenes, though it was a long time before the name came to be applied to all. Therefore, though the myth refers to them all as Hellenes, the Hellenes were only a small, quite insignificant group on the peninsula. We will explore the Hellenes in detail within another webisode, but make note that the Hellenes are expanding city by city through war and conquest. Continuing onward, according to the myth, Hellen, the father of this mixed multitude of tribes, captured the significant city of Thebes. Apollodorus and others told us Hellen established his son Aeolus as the new king of Thebes and his successor in Thyia. The descendants of these peoples in these 2 lands of Thebes and Thyia did in fact become known as Aeolians. According to Herodotus, before the miscegenation which took place in the region, it was said that the Aeolians were previously called Pelasgians, whom were the original carbon organic tribes of the peninsula. The rest of the Peloponnese was vast, but thinly populated, so Hellen and his descendants had come far enough to claim the land. It was reportedly bequeathed to Hellen's son Xuthus. Seeing the enormous size of the Peloponnese, Xuthus in turn divided it between his own 2 sons. The expanse of land west of Argos he gave to Achaeus. And in time the people of that region came to be known as Achaeans. The Achaeans, as discussed in webisode 1, were known as the Ahioa according to the Hittites. The smaller part of the peninsula, encompassing only Argos, Mycenae, Tiryns, and the arm of land which reached eastward into the sea, he added to the kingdom of the Ionians. These Ionians would eventually extend their reach eastward across many Aegean islands. Again, this was the oral tradition of the Greek people, which was later recorded by many writers. Hellen and his followers then marched southeast to the modest settlement at Athens. This town and the surrounding rocky land, which seemed not well suited to agriculture nor otherwise producing wealth, was placed under the charge of the Ionians, much like the Hellenes had become a predominantly lighter stock of people within the region, and it was this lighter admixture which was subjugating and destroying the darker carbon organic tribes, families, and clans who remained in the region. Therefore, the Dorians were the unmixed seed who were able to trace their seed unmixed back to Hercules, whom we identified as being of Egyptian and Phoenician origin. We also have the Ionian Hellenes, whom have a greater percentage of Yamnayya Steppe ancestry within them, producing a much lighter admixture amongst the tribes. Now we know there was a racial difference and enmity within the region between the 2 largest tribes, being the Carbon Organic Dorians and the hybrid Asian albino Ionians. According to Thucydides' books 6 to 7, the Dorians and the Ionians are the 2 most numerous and politically important ethnic divisions of the Greek race in classical times. Let us now discuss thoroughly the relevant Thucydidean extracts from 6 and 7, which contain references to kinship arguments and ethnic antipathy on both sides in the Peloponnesian War, in order to draw safe conclusions regarding the point of view through which the historian dealt with the issue of the Dorian and Ionian distinction. Let us now comment briefly on the subject of kinship. The idea of racial kinship was connected in ancient Greek minds with myth and religion. There were two reasons for this. First, the peoples who were thought to be connected by kinship traced their origins to common mythical, or sometimes heroic, ancestors. And second, they had cults in common, a metropolis, or founding city of a colony, often passed on its cults to that colony or daughter city. This mother-daughter relationship was a common type of kinship between cities and involved religious and other kinds of reciprocity. According to Gom in his historical commentary on Thucydides, the sentiments attached to community of ancestry and dialect were normally taken into account in the language of diplomacy, as were traditional enmities between Ionians and Dorians. In the assembly at Camarina, where the issue was whether Camarina should join the Athenians, Ionians, against Syracuse, the Sicilian Hermocrates repeatedly appeals to the Dorian origins of the people of Camarina, to the racial pride of the Dorian states, and to the kinship with Syracuse that should affect their final decision. Later on he emphasizes the inveterate enmity between Ionians and Dorians and the necessity for unity between all the latter. As a reply, Euphemus, the Athenians' ambassador, argued that Athens was justified in dominating her subjects, represented Athenian policy in Greece as a defense of Ionians against Dorians, and emphasized too the natural enmity between Dorians and Ionians, but, wisely enough, did not base his whole speech on the kinship argument, as the people of Camarina were Dorians. Taking into consideration all the above-mentioned arguments, we conclude that in the years of the Peloponnesian War, ethnic feeling between Dorians and Ionians was not only an existing phenomenon, but also highly considered as an influence upon men's actions. Obviously, Thucydides was well aware of this, since generally, according to Andrew's commentary, considerations of race and origins are often advanced by ancient writers as motives for political actions, and they have been more effective than we are inclined to imagine. The period between the 12th and 8th centuries BC in the Aegean is considered the Dark Ages. It is said that the Greek Dark Ages were a time of Ionian settlement and a consolidation into an alliance called the Ionian League. As we discussed in the webisode Mycenaean Genetic Fusion, with the exit of the Carbon Organic Afar Inca tribes, the hybrid Asian albinos are now in a quandary, as they have taken over the cities, culture, and technologies, but they don't know how to use it or how to maintain it, which therefore caused the demise of the entire region via the rise of immorality, deviant sexual practices, constant wars, destruction of the land and resources, and though they had been brought up to a civilized standard through Egyptianization via conquest and intermarriage, they are still barbaric illiterate nomads until the end of the Dark Ages. In the myth, the sum of the Achaeans displaced from the Peloponnesus gathered at Athens under a leader Ion and became identified as Ionians. In the Platonic work Laws, it is mentioned that the other Achaeans who fought in the Trojan War, on their return from Troy, were driven out from their homes and cities, so they migrated under a leader named Dorus, and hence they were renamed Dorians. The tumultuous changes after the Trojan War brought the Dorians into this chain of events. The incorrect term, the Dorian invasion, is connected with the return of the sons of Hercules, Heracles, who are known as the Hericladie. According to the Hericladie, the Dorian land was under the ownership of Heracles, which he had put in trust for his descendants. This allowed the Heraclids and Dorians to become socially intertwined. The legend is that when the Dorians were pushed out of their homeland, and the sons of Hercules eventually inspired the Dorians to battle their enemies in order to take back control of the Peloponnese. It was the hybrid albino invasion, now under the tribal names of Hellenes and Ionians, which sent the indigenous Carbon Organic tribes, clans, and families southward in their mass migration, and would have pushed the Dorians in that same direction. The ancient Greeks noted the mass migration of Dorians southward from Epirus, northern Thessaly, and western Macedonia. Herodotus, Thucydides, Pausanias, Apollodorus, and others described these events in which the Dorians took over the Peloponnesus from Messenia in the west to Argos in the east. The first widespread use of the term Dorian invasion appears to date to the 1830s. A popular alternative was Dorian migration. For example, in 1831 Thomas Cately was using Dorian migration in Outline of History. By 1838, in the mythology of ancient Greece and Italy, he was using Dorian invasion. Neither of those two words exactly fits the events, as they imply an incursion from outside a society to within, but the Dorians were not outside of either Greece or Greek society. William Mitford's History of Greece, 1784 to 1810, described a Dorian conquest followed by a revolution in Peloponnesus so complete that, except in the rugged province of Arcadia, nothing remained unaltered. In 1824, Karl Ottfried Muller's Die Dorier was published in German and was translated into English by Tufnell and Lewis for publication in 1830. They use such terms as the Doric invasion and the invasion of the Dorians to translate Muller's Die Einwanderung von den Doriern, literally, the migration of the Dorians, which was quite a different concept. This is how easy European scholars change words, dates, and meanings to suit their narratives, and notice much of this is taking place in the 1800s. We need to be absolutely clear in this matter, as it will come up time and time again that the 1700s to 1800s is when much of Western history was fabricated. J.P. Mallory wrote in 1989 concerning the various hypotheses of Proto-Greek that had been put forward since the decipherment. Reconciliation of all these different theories seems out of the question. The current state of our knowledge of the Greek dialects can accommodate Indo-Europeans entering Greece at any time between 2200 to 1600 BC to emerge later as Greek speakers. By the end of the 20th century, the concept of an invasion by external Greek speakers had ceased to be the mainstream view, although still asserted by a minority. Thus, Jeffrey Horrocks writes, Greek is now widely believed to be the product of contact between Indo-European immigrants and the speakers of the indigenous languages of the Balkan Peninsula beginning 2000 BC. Meanwhile, as the philologists were understanding the language as belonging to invaders, the archaeologists were encountering what appeared to be a wave of destruction of Mycenaean palaces. Michael David Wood, OBE-FSA, born July 23, 1948, is an English historian and broadcaster and suggests relying on tradition, especially that of Thucydides. Let us not forget the legends, at least as models for what might have happened. They tell us of constant rivalries with the royal clans of the heroic age. In summary, the Mycenaean world disintegrated through feuding clans of the great royal families. The possibility of some sort of internal struggle had long been under consideration. Chadwick, after following and critiquing the development of different views, in 1976 settled on a theory of his own that there was no Dorian invasion. The palaces were destroyed by Dorians who had been in the Peloponnesus all along as a subservient lower class, douero, male slave, and now were staging a revolution. This revolution extended as far north as Corinth, but did not reach Athens or other cities in that direction. Athenians were particularly proud of maintaining their hybrid albino-Asian Ionian heritage rather than yielding to the Carbon Organic Dorians. The people of Athens were not forced to migrate during this unsettled period, which put them in a unique position among the Greeks, as we will see in future webisodes. Thucydides reported that the Dorians completed their sweeping takeover of the Peloponnesus by 80 years after the Trojan War. It is believed that the Dorians owned land and evolved into aristocrats. This was at the time where carbon organic monarchy and kings as a form of government was being removed, and land ownership and democracy became a key form of rule instigated from Athens, the hybrid Asian albino power base after the Dark Ages. In the city-states, the carbon organic Dorians coupled with the hybrid Asian albino Ionians for political power and business, and also helped influence Greek art, such as through their invention of choral lyrics in the theater. The historians had defined the Greek Dark Ages, a period of general decline, in this case the disappearance of the palace economy and with it law and order, loss of writing, diminishment of trade, decrease in population and abandonment of settlements, destroyed or undestroyed, metal starvation and loss of the fine arts, or at least the diminution of their quality, evidenced especially in pottery. By its broadest definition, the Dark Age lasted between 1200 to 750 BC, the start of what is referred to as Archaic Greece lasting from 800 BC to 480 BC. In the Archaic period, the now fusion of hybrid Albian Ionians and carbon organic Dorians, now all being referred to as Greeks, settled across the Mediterranean and the Black Seas, but with the darker still ruling aristocracy among those who could still trace their royal bloodlines back to ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. The Archaic period began with a massive increase in the predominantly hybrid mixed multitude Greek population and of significant changes that rendered the Greek world at the end of the 8th century entirely unrecognizable from its beginning. Though hybrid albino Asians as Ionians were an emerging power, the ruling aristocracy as Carbon Organic Dorians still existed and became the Argead dynasty, also known as the Temenid dynasty, which was an ancient Macedonian royal house of Dorian Greek provenance. They were the founders and the ruling dynasty of the Kingdom of Macedon from about 700 to 310 BC. We will explore this further in the soon-to-come webisode called Alexander the Greek Agent of Enlil, exclusive on the Claim of Throne Series 1, The Fallacy of Greece and Rome. Let's finish up this so-called Dorian invasion and the myth of an Aryan ancient Greece by addressing the blatant identity theft what has been taking place over hundreds of years by the hybrid Asian albinos referred to as Caucasians. As with many a historical myth about the origins of various Greek cultures, this one has a source in Herodotus and was an attempt by mostly German scholars in the 1800s to explain the changes in language from non-Hellenic to Hellenic as the truth is staring them in the face, but they refused to accept the African substratum they were finding. The mysterious Pelasgians appear as a native substrate of possibly Anatolian origin, except the Athenians, who were indigenous but became Greek by changing languages. The myth of the Dorian, which according to the German scholars meant blonde hair, blue eyes Aryan or Nordic invasion, begins, in many ways, as a failure of methodology, specifically as a result of historical positivism. Historian Jonathan Hall once described historical positivism as a mode of seeing in myths of ethnic origins a hazy and refracted recollection of genuine population movements in the Bronze Age. Variants of these myths were pathological aberrations from a real historical memory, read Hall, Ethnic Identity in Greek Antiquity, page 41. Unfortunately, these pathological aberrations became bound to ideological positions that became linked to political parties and movements and race science. One can read all about it in Brill's Companion to the Classics and Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, in the chapters by Weidman and White specifically, or going back pre-Nazi in Helen Roche's Sparta's German Children. Hitler and many a German firmly believed that Spartans being Dorians and Germans were one people and that the martial valor and glory of Greece was the result of Germans invading Greece and establishing a civilization. They, the modern Germans, were then both the progenitors of ancient Greek civilization and its heirs. And they, as Tacitus explained to them, were a pure people. Their blood and Boden ideology explained both who they were and why they were born to be conquerors. Some 19th century texts suggest that some German scientists and anthropologists explained the fall of ancient Greek civilization by the deterioration of Germans too long from their proper climate, and the heat of Greece innervated them over time, making the rise of a new Greece in Germany the only solution. Hitler certainly saw it that way, as did many of his predecessors, like Karl Ottfried Müller. Martin Brennel's Black Athena, pointing out the long trail of classical philologists and historians invested in a Northern European invasion as the only possible explanation for the development of an advanced civilization in Southern Europe, was not wrong. The Aryan, Dorian, later Nordic invasion was used to explain not only ancient Greek civilizations, but also those throughout Asia and even North Africa. How long did historians and archaeologists struggle to fit the evidence into a narrative of a Dorian invasion? And yet, even while scholars have moved on, the general population has not. And the recourse this public makes to genetics is complicating the issue. While there is quite a bit of good work being done in the realm of genetics, popularizing articles in magazines like Science and National Geographic make it seem like we have hundreds upon hundreds of solid samples to test from, resulting in new discoveries every few months in the origins of genes for whiteness or blackness or Homo sapiens versus Neanderthals, etc. Typically, however, we have only a few samples and studies of the sort that discovered the Greeks really do have near mythical origins, ancient DNA reveals. These studies suffer from numerous flaws in the data, being small sample sizes, assumptions about migration patterns, comparisons only with modern populations, choosing not to randomize samples and give the general population a sense of certainty where there is none. But the Aryan/Dorian/Nordic myth does real harm if classicists and ancient historians don't challenge it and do it regularly. We currently have one small group of people, being the hybrid Asian albinos, aka white people, laying claim to all of history. In the end, the lingering myth of an Aryan invasion in the popular imagination is now grounded in different evidence. It is obvious that the evidence is that hybrid Asian albinos invaded Anatolia and the Balkans from the Russian steppe, Caucasus region, known as the Yamnayya. They invaded an already advanced culture of Carbon Organic Africans and Sumerians and sought to subjugate the indigenous people of the regions. The Carbon Organic Dorians, whom were the ancestors of the African deities of the heroic age, rose up from the subjugation of these tribes of various admixtures to re-establish their genetic lines of rulership handed down from their ancient African and Sumerian ancestors. Thank you for enjoying this episode, and we will debunk further lies on the next webisode. Join us on the next episode as we continue to unravel the mysteries of our past to create a better blueprint for the future for all fallen humanity. This series, The Claim of Thrones, will take you on a journey through the universe, across the galactic heavens to the eventual seeding of the planet Earth. This series will also cover the hidden realities of how humanity came about, the various cataclysms and restarts, and follow the various bloodlines of indigenous rights of inheritance. This narrative sets the sacred record straight in regards to who's who on the planet Earth and begins the journey of the lawful reversion and restitution for the heirs of Mother Earth. If you like this content, please subscribe and hit the notification button, as well as support across our many social media platforms.